Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Coming up on the show today, Kansas has revoked more than 1,700 driver's licenses from transgender people, what impact that will have, and how they're fighting back. Up first, though, our top story. The war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran is spreading around the region. At least 3 ships were attacked in the Strait of Hormuz on Tuesday. Iran took responsibility for at least one of those vessels. Separately, U.S. Central Command says it took out 16 Iranian mine layers and multiple naval vessels. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting today over the humanitarian crisis the war is creating in Lebanon. More than 750,000 people have been displaced in the country, according to figures from the Lebanese government. And the pace is unprecedented. More than 100,000 people were registered as displaced between Monday and Tuesday alone. So we went to our NBC News foreign correspondent, Danielle Hamamdjian, who is on the ground for us in Beirut. Hi, Danielle.
Hey, Yasmin.
Tell me how and why Lebanon has gotten pulled into this conflict right now.
Well, Israel is launching strikes on southern Lebanon and eastern Lebanon and parts of Beirut, and Hezbollah, which is this paramilitary group that is funded and backed by Iran, is also firing back. But this all started on the weekend. The bombing campaign began in Iran, and I have to say, here in Lebanon, a country so painfully familiar with war, there was sort of collective sigh of relief that, we're not being dragged into another war in the Middle East. But then in the early hours of Monday morning, Hezbollah launched rockets and drones into northern Israel to avenge the killing of Khamenei. And that's when it all kicked off. And within a week, there were more than 700,000 people displaced in a tiny country of just 6 million people. That is a huge chunk of the population. There have been mass evacuation orders, not only in villages in southern Lebanon, but here in Beirut. And from where I am, I can see parts of the southern suburbs of Beirut. And the focus of the Israeli strikes are on that area because it is a Hezbollah stronghold. It is, however, home to hundreds of thousands of civilians. And so late last week, the IDF put out a warning, evacuate immediately. And so there was this mass panic in the streets. People grabbed whatever they could, their kids, the clothes on their backs, they jumped in the car, mopeds, they walked, they just left the area. Because when the IDF puts out these evacuation orders, yes, it's a warning that strikes are coming, but you don't know if it's coming within 30 minutes or 3 hours. There are no sirens here and there are no bunkers. And so people are sleeping on the promenade, in churches, in schools, in stadiums, until this Israeli operation is over. And who knows how long that will take.
So in keeping with these evacuation orders, it's pushing people northwards, it seems. They are without homes, as you mentioned, children in tow as well. It's becoming a humanitarian crisis.
Absolutely. And it's not just the scale of the displacement. The death toll is also quickly rising. Over 500 dead. And at some point last week, 10 children every day were dying. So dozens of kids have been killed. And so we were given access today to the pediatric ward at a central Beirut hospital. And we saw in one case a 4-year-old who had massive injuries in her face because of shrapnel. But in that hospital ward are also children who suffered from Israeli strikes in Gaza. They came to Beirut for treatment, and they are now hearing the sound of Israeli strikes not too far away. And for some of those kids, the aunt told me he was walking down the stairs, heard the boom, ran back up. It was also painfully familiar. And so the fear now among so many is that this conflict between Israel and Hezbollah will go on long after there is a resolution in the rest of the Middle East or some kind of peace is reached.
You speak about, obviously, the physical harm that these children have experienced. You can't also help but think about the emotional harm, the PTSD that they experience every day as they sit in that hospital and continue to hear those explosions outside, likely their hospital windows.
And if I can just add something, Yasmin, the strikes on Beirut have not just been concentrated in that southern suburb where Hezbollah has a lot of influence. there seems to be a pattern now of precision strikes, targeted strikes. There have been 2 on hotels, one in central Beirut, not far from here. It's about half a mile from us. And just last night, there was another one in an apartment building. And you can see when we talk about precision strikes, you can see the corner room of the 5th floor of the hotel, for example. And the IDF is targeting specific individuals. In many cases, it's been commanders of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, who are here. How many of them? Who knows? Experts tell me that, once Israel killed the former leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, the IRGC became sort of micromanagers. They came, they helped them retrain, regroup, etc. And so they are here, and the fear is that they're hiding among civilians, but they are being targeted by Israel. And there could be, and there are civilians walking by who also could get hit.
Right. There's collateral damage oftentimes to even precision strikes. I want to talk about a potential diplomatic way out of this thing. We mentioned that the UN is holding this Emergency Security Council meeting today. Is there potential for a diplomatic exit from this conflict, specifically with Lebanon? We have heard what has come out of a potential diplomatic ending between Iran and the U.S., and right now it doesn't seem like it's possible today, as of this hour. But when it comes to Lebanon, is it possible? Or is there a potential for this to spiral even further into a ground war inside of Lebanon?
The fear here is that Israel will take this opportunity to seize territory in Lebanon. At the end of the day, what will make Israel retreat would be pressure by the U.S. government. It's unclear if that's going to happen anytime soon. Without going into the weeds of domestic politics here, what I will say was a seismic event in Lebanese politics earlier this week was a Lebanese president openly urging for direct talks with Israel, wanting permanent security arrangements, calling Hezbollah's actions a betrayal. There is no appetite in this country for more war. I mean, obviously, this is a very diverse society in terms of, there's Sunnis and Shia and Christians. But even among the Shia Muslims who are ideologically aligned with Hezbollah, many have told us, certainly off camera, that this was a bad decision by Hezbollah. They do not want to be dragged into another war. France, Emmanuel Macron had put in a few calls before this UN meeting. That didn't go anywhere. But following the president of Lebanon's calls for direct talks, we've not really yet heard an official response by Israel. But Israel keeps launching strikes into Lebanon. So again, unless there is, I think, pressure by the U.S. government, things are not going to slow down here.
Danielle Hamamdin, thank you.
Thanks, Yasmin.
Transgender rights are facing increasing restrictions from Washington to local state houses. President Trump wants to add revisions to the SAVE Act that could put anti-trans measures into the new voter eligibility bill. And this week, a judge upheld a law that immediately invalidated the driver's licenses of 1,700 transgender Kansans. Unlike other states that only prohibit future gender marker changes, Kansas is also retroactively canceling them, some dating back 2 decades. So I want to bring in NBC News Enterprise reporter Joe Yerkaba, who spoke with some of the transgender folks impacted by this in Kansas. Hi, Joe.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. So, as I said, you have this judge in Kansas who has upheld a law that was enacted back in February over Governor Laura Kelly's veto. 2 transgender residents had filed a suit against this law last month, arguing that it violates their rights to personal autonomy, to privacy, to equality, due process, and freedom of speech. Tell us more about how this law actually came to pass.
Sure, yeah. So the law was actually a few years in the making. Back in 2023, Kansas passed a law regulating the definition of sex under the Kansas Constitution. And that basically said that you can only be male or female, and that is assigned at birth. And so at that time, the Attorney General, Chris Kobach, literally weeks after the law passed, sued his own state to try to force the Department of Revenue to do exactly what this law does now, invalidate the licenses of trans Kansans. And the Department of Revenue basically said, no, we can't do that because that's not actually what the law says. And it went back and forth in the courts for a while until the Kansas Supreme Court said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Trans Kansans licenses are still valid. And so then he pushed the legislature to pass this law last month. And what it does is it invalidates their licenses and also their birth certificates and prohibits them from using restrooms in government buildings that are aligned with their gender identity.
So walk us through the argument here from the judge in upholding this law.
Yeah, so the judge basically said that he doesn't think he has enough information to issue a temporary restraining order. And he said that he has heard from both sides that, Kansans for the most part are accepting and inclusive. And so he just didn't really buy the argument that trans Kansans could face discrimination or harassment from employers or from police officers if they get pulled over or from anyone else that they have to present their ID to.
So not necessarily even steeped in law, that it was more a feeling that this judge had?
Right,
That's
exactly.
the reporting that you have?
Yeah, and he did say that he doesn't think that there's enough, that the ACLU had enough past state case law to go on to show that the Kansas Constitution protects people in this way from state intervention.
It's not just about, for instance, being able to drive a car. There are a lot of other reasons why one needs a driver's license in life, especially in this country right now, of all times. It's to fly domestically. You need it to be able to vote, to open a bank account, get into a bar, for instance, right? Prove that you're 21 years of age. You spoke with a number of transgender folks in Kansas, including Jalen Abeg. I want to listen to what Jalen had to say.
I was equal parts outraged and unclear on the exact interpretation of the law, and disappointed, disheartened. Kansas has been my home for many, many years now, and yet ever since I have been out as a woman and as a transgender person, it's done nothing but break my heart.
How is the law now going to change Jalen's life? What are the things that she is most worried about?
So Jalen is actually leaving the state as a result of the law. She's a lifelong Kansan, but she's choosing to move to another state because she said that she doesn't want to have to live in Kansas under this. She doesn't feel welcome anymore. She actually drives Lyft as her primary source of income. Right now, she can't do that because her car is in the shop. But once she's able to drive again, this would basically put her at risk every single day when she's out on the roads doing her job. And she said she doesn't want to have to live life again with a license that doesn't reflect who she is.
Okay, so Jalen's leaving the state. She has that option. A lot of people inside the state of Kansas right now do not have that option, don't even want that option, really. You spoke with Matthew Newman, who is the director of LGBTQ+ Kansas. I want to play what Matthew said.
I love Kansas, and there's no way you're going to get me to leave.
Matthew's sticking it out. So what is everyday life? What are obstacles? Matthew and other folks that choose to remain in Kansas with this law now in place, what are they going to be up against?
Yeah, and the ACLU attorney said this at the hearing. Basically, every time they have to present their driver's license, whether it's to a hotel clerk, a bank teller, if they're renting a car, when they go to vote, they're going to out themselves as transgender if they do end up having to get the license on the gender marker on their license changed back. So anytime they present that ID, it's to create confusion for the person looking at it, and basically just make it so that they have to disclose this very private information about themselves.
Explain for people that don't necessarily know, Joe, why that would be a difficult conversation, right? If I go to the DMV and someone asks me, how do you identify? I say, I'm a female, right? For me, it's not a difficult conversation to have. I'm fine to tell someone that I'm a woman. Explain for people that don't know or understand what it is like to live as a transgender person in this country, how that could feasibly be a difficult, worrisome, anxiety-inducing conversation to have.
Yeah, it can be really terrifying for people. I did a story a few years ago on specifically how this affects voting, and I spoke to a number of trans people in Tennessee, which has an extremely strict voter ID law, about what would happen when they would go to the poll and present an ID where they look like themselves in the photo, but it has an inaccurate gender marker. So, for example, it has an F on it because they were assigned female at birth and now they look like a man. And so they would present that, and the poll worker would immediately be confused. And in a lot of cases, they have to call over other poll workers to say, what do I do? Does this ID look legitimate to you? They're double and triple checking the person's signature in the voter books. And it basically, it causes a scene. So it just makes their lives, just their everyday lives, harder. And we know that this is happening as well with passports. A number of trans people have gotten back passports with inaccurate gender markers now because of the Trump administration's passport policy. So this happens at TSA regularly as well. I myself have experienced this going through TSA because I have a passport with an inaccurate gender marker. So it creates a lot of confusion for people and it just makes it really difficult.
So what's next then? Is this going to the Supreme Court?
Well, what's next is this will go just through the state court. They'll hear the case in its entirety, and this judge will decide if his initial decision was the right one. And then that decision will almost certainly be appealed regardless of which way it goes.
So this is the first state to issue this retroactive ruling, Kansas that is, but it's not the only state that's looking at these laws and restrictions. I mentioned federally there have been a lot of efforts to roll back rights for LGBTQ plus people in this country right now. The president wants to add anti-trans measures to the Save America Act, which is ostensibly about voting. You report on the LGBTQ community a lot. How are people in the community feeling right now?
It's a really difficult time for people, especially in the last, I would say, 2 years, because there's been a shift in this legislation we're seeing. So I would say about 5 years ago, we started seeing laws like Florida's Don't Say Gay law, regulating what people can talk about in classrooms. And we saw laws restricting access to transition-related medical care for minors and sports in school. Now we're seeing laws specifically target the idea that someone can be trans and whether they can have accurate identification that reflects who they are. So now there's been a shift to, this idea, there's a question of whether you can exist as a trans person and be recognized in society at all.
Joe Yerkeba, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that is going to do it for us. Here's the scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.